الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So today inshallah ta'ala in discussing the book Arba'in an-Nawawiyya that today we'll be discussing a new hadith. So hadith Ar-Rabi' wa Thalathun. So we have ended the hadith Athalith wa Thalathun last week I think, and so this inshallah ta'ala we move to the hadith that comes after, which will be the 34th hadith in this series. So as the system that we follow, that the hadith will be read and then we start a discussion relating to this particular hadith. Tafaddal.
Bismillahi wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Hadith number 34, forbidden the evil is from Iman. عن أبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله عنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم يقول من رأى منكم منكرا فليغيره بيده فإن لم يستطع فبلسانه فإن لم يستطع فبقلبه وذلك أضعف الإيمان رواه مسلم. On the authority of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu that he said, I heard the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam saying, whoever amongst you sees an evil, then let him change it with his hand. If he is not able, then let him change it with his tongue. If he is not able, then let him hate it in his heart, and that is the weakest of Iman, faith, related by Muslim.
So that's the hadith that we'll be discussing inshallah ta'ala, which is Al-Hadith Ar-Rabi' wa Thalathun, which is the 34th hadith in this series, mentioned here by Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. So the hadith that we mentioned, that as they mentioned that the hadith, which is the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, and this hadith that we'll be discussing various things. So the first of those things that to discuss regarding this particular hadith, as for the first regarding the narrator of the hadith, who's an Abi Sa'id al-Khudri, that we have mentioned something of his tarjuma before. So we have mentioned and discussed some matters pertaining to the narrator of the hadith with as-Sahabi al-Jalil Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu in previous hadith as. Then the next of those things that I mentioned regarding takhrij of the hadith. So the next of those things is takhrij of the hadith. So kind of going back to the source of this hadith, going back to those who have reported this particular hadith. So it is mentioned here by Busiri in his brief notes regarding the hadith. On this, they mentioned that Rawahu Muslim. So An-Nawawi, he mentioned the hadith Rawahu Muslim. That hadith it is collected by Imam Muslim in his Sahih. Then Al-Busiri, he mentioned regarding this hadith, so in addition to Muslim, he mentioned wa Abu Dawud Tayalasi. That also the hadith is found in Abu Dawud at-Tayalasi wa min tariq Abu Na'im al-Hafid intaha. So he mentioned that in general the hadith that is also collected by Abu Dawud Tayalasi in his Musnad. Then overall regarding concerning others who have made takhrij, as we meant that those who have made takhrij of the hadith, particularly this Arba'in an-Nawawiyya, as for this hadith they mentioned that this hadith akhrajahu Muslim in his Sahih. Also the hadith can be found in Abu Dawud in his Sunan. Third, At-Tirmidhi in his Al-Jama' or As-Sunan. Nasa'i fi Sunan. Ibn Majah in his Sunan. Ahmad in his Musnad. They also mention hadith in the At-Tamheed, which is by Ibn Abdul Barr in his book At-Tamheed. Also the hadith can be found in Ibn Hibban in his Sahih. And as mentioned, Tayalisi, Abu Dawud at-Tayalisi in his Musnad. So Abu Dawud at-Tayalisi, yes, a Musnad, his own collection. The hadith also found there. Abdul Razak in his book Al-Musannaf. Abu Na'im in his book Al-Hilya. And others. So as he mentioned, of the main ones that we'll try to, we'll focus on, he mentioned the hadith in the Sahih Muslim. In the Muslim as mentioned here, by the author, rahimahullah ta'ala. Also the hadith in the Abu Dawud, At-Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, and Ibn Majah, Ahmad and others, Ibn Hibban and others. So That's considered those are the sort of hadith, and the hadith that the ulama mentioned, the hadith is sahih. So the hadith is somewhat, the ulama have clarified the hadith is sahih, also the hadith in the Sahih Muslim, which is the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. So as for the hadith that is in Sahih Muslim, that with this particular hadith, that we'll mention different riwayat of the hadith. So we'll mention different sources or different wording of the hadith. Also with this hadith, it comes with a qissa. This hadith, it comes with a story. So this hadith, it comes like a story that is the backdrop of this particular hadith. So as for when we go back to the hadith in the Sahih Muslim, that also the hadith also to the hadith in the Sahih Muslim, that it mentions Sahih Muslim in his when he mentioned the hadith, he called بسنده يعني إمام مسلم بسنده عن طارق بن شهاب قال حديث هذا حديث أبي بكر قال. So the hadith they mentioned قال يعني the hadith أول من بدأ بالخطبة يوم العيد قبل الصلاة مروان. So the hadith in a Sahih Muslim, it mentions that the first one, and that's the story behind this hadith, that the first one to start with the khutbah for Salatul Eid, Marwan. So Salatul Eid, that how it is to be Salatul Eid, that will have the Salat and then the khutbah. That's how it is to be done. That's the way the Prophet Islam and Abu Bakr and Omar that prayed Salatul Eid. We have the Salah and then we have the khutbah. But it mentioned that أول من بدأ بالخطبة, that the first of those to start with the khutbah, then the Salat يوم العيد قبل الصلاة, they mention Marwan. فقام إليه رجل. So for one of the person who was there for the Salat al-Eid, that and Marwan, as we discussed, you have note that name Marwan. They mention فقام إليه رجل. So a person approached him فقال and said to him الصلاة قبل خطبة. Then he mentioned that the Salat, so the person said to Marwan that the Salat is to be prayed before the khutbah. فقال قد ترك ما ها هناك. فقال أبو سعيد. Then he mentioned it was left as such. Then Abu Sa'id al-Khudri was somewhat present and overhearing what was taking place. Amma hada, they mentioned Amma hada, meaning concerning this person. So like a general person was there in the crowd. Marwan is the Amir of Medina. Marwan is the Amir of Medina. But then Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, who was also present during this time, when this was taking place, قال أما هذا, as for him, meaning the man who approached Marwan, فقال فقد قضى ما عليه, that he have fulfilled what is upon him. He have carried out what is upon him. Then he mentioned سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول. Then Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, then he mentioned that I heard the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying من رأى منكم منكر فليغيره بيده, that the one who sees amongst you an evil, then he should change it with his hand. فإن لم يستطع, and if the person is unable to do so, فبلسانه, then with his lisan, with his tongue, his mouth, with speech. فإن لم يستطع فبقلبه, and if the person is unable, then he do so with his in his heart, within his heart. وذلك أضعف الإيمان, and this is the weakest of iman. Then it means that's concerning the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. So the hadith here inside Muslim, that regarding what the hadith is mentioned, that is a story attached to it, and we have somewhat mentioned the story that relates to this hadith. So it's concerning that wording in the Muslim, that if we go to At-Tirmidhi, I forget Abu Dawood is so if we go to At-Tirmidhi, so it's the hadith in the Abu Dawood, left my Abu Dawood inside, Ibn Majah and Tirmidhi and Nasa'i. So the narration in Nasa'i, so we'll go to the narration, the wording. So we're discussing the wording of that. So the word that he mentioned here is that of the wording in that is mentioned here in the Muslim. As for what is mentioned in At-Tirmidhi, that At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned when the idea concerning and Ibn Shihab قال أول من قدم الخطبة. So At-Tirmidhi in his narration he mentioned أول من قدم. The one in Muslim mentioned أول من بدأ. With me? نعم. So I mentioned أول من قدم الخطبة قبل الصلاة Marwan, that the first one who to put before the khutbah before the salat, Marwan. فقام رجل, so a person approached him, a person stand, فقال لمروان, the person said to Marwan, خالفت السنة, خالفت السنة, that you Marwan, you have gone against the sunnah, you have gone against the sunnah. فقال يا فلان ترك ما هنا, then leave what is here. فقال أبو سعيد الخدري أما هذا فقد قضى ما عليه, as for him, this person, he have done what is upon him. Then he mentioned the hadith, then he mentioned سمعت رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام يقول من رأى منكم, listen to the wording of the mention, من رأى منكم فلينكره بيد. With me? A slight difference in the wording. So they mention the other one inside Muslim mention what? غير. نعم. Read, continue. من رأى منكم منكر فل. Read what you have. Instead, read what you have.
من رأى منكرا فلينكره بيده ومن لم يستطع فبلسانه ومن لم يستطع فبقلبه وذلك أضعف الإيمان.
Read again. من رأى منكم منكر. So in that one, okay, that's the one in Arba'in. No, said Arba'in. I'm talking the one in Arba'in. The one in Arba'in. What it says after then, munkar. فليغيره. So that in this one it mentioned man ra'a munkaran falyunkirhu. It does have تغير. Mention فلينكره. So that's we got a tin with the mention فلينكره بيدي. ومن لم يستطع فبلساني, and who is not able, then with his tongue. ومن لم يستطع فبقلبي, and the one who is unable, then with his heart. وهذا أدهف وذلك أدهف الإيمان. This is the weakest of Iman. This is the weakest of Iman. So the word here I mentioned that the wording somewhat a little slight difference in wording. Muslim use تغير. Here he doesn't use the word تغيير, he uses the word فلينكر. Nam. So that's a difference in wording. So that's concerned. They mentioned At-Tirmidhi هذا حديث حسن صحيح. Then At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned هذا حديث حسن صحيح. The hadith is sahih. So see that slight difference in the wordings. With me, ikhwan? I said I forget Abu Dawud. So we use Ibn Majah, and this is Ibn Majah. So as for Ibn Majah rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned in his narration, he mentioned that Ibn Majah, his narration, it mentions an Abi Sa'id al-Khudri. So the hadith, he mentioned Ibn Majah بسنده عن طارق ibn Shihab عن أبي سعيد الخدري قال. So Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, he mentioned أخرج مروان منبر في يوم العيد, that Marwan, he took out the minbar and يوم العيد. فبدأ بالخطبة, and he started with the khutbah قبل الصلاة, before the salat. فقال رجل, so a person approached him, a person said to Marwan, Ya Marwan, خالفت السنة. Marwan, I said Marwan, I said that you have gone against the sunnah. Then I mentioned, Marwan, you have gone against the sunnah. أخرجت المنبر في هذا يوم, that you have brought out the minbar on this day, which is يوم العيد. Nam. So of the thing that they mentioned, ولم يخرج, that they never used to before take out the minbar for Eid. وبدأت بالخطبة قبل الصلاة, and also you started the khutbah before the salat. Nam. Then I mentioned ولم يكن يبدأ بها, and before they didn't do this. فقال Abu Sa'id, and Abu Sa'id was overhearing or seen what was going on. فقال أما هذا فقد قضى ما عليه. As for that man, he has done what is upon him. سمعت رسول الله عليه السلام يقول, that he mentioned, من رأى منكرا. They mentioned, من رأى منكم منكرا فاستطاع أن يغيره بيده فغيره فإن لم يستطيع فبلسانه فإن لم يستطيع بلسانه وبقلبه وذلك الأضعف الإيمان. So look, a slight difference in wording. Now this is not Abu Dawud, this is Ibn Majah. This is Ibn Majah. So a slight little difference. We mentioned Man ra'a minkum munkar, the one who amongst you see a munkar, fastata, if you're able, and yughayyiruhu biyadihi falyughayyirhu, that if you're able to change it with your hand, then you should do so. If you're able to change it with your hand, then you should do so. Then I mentioned make a change. And if you're unable, then with your lisan. And if you're not able to with your lisan, فَبِقَلْبِ, then with your heart. Then I mentioned وَذَلِكَ عَدْفُ الْإِيمَانِ. This is the weakest of Iman. So that hadith in there. So a slight difference in wording. Now, so I mentioned that Man ra'a minkum munkar fastata, if you're able. Now, so it's a slight difference in the wording of that hadith. Now, so forgot the wording in the Nasa'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, that when he mentioned this hadith, he mentioned again بسنده عن طارق بن شهاب قال أبو سعيد الخدري رضي الله عنه, أو أبو سعيد, سمعت رسول الله عليه السلام قال من رأى منكرا فليغيره بيده. The one who sees an evil, then he should change it with his hand. فإن لم يستطيع فبلسانه, and if he's unable, then with his tongue. فإن لم يستطيع فبقلبه, and if not able, with his heart. وذلك أضعف الإيمان. That this is the weakest of Iman. So that's the hadith that he mentioned here. Then he mentioned again the hadith again. Again he mentioned the hadith. After that, he mentioned another, he mentioned with a different isnad, but it goes back to Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. قال سمعت رسول الله عليه السلام يقول من رأى منكم فغيره بيدي فقد برئ. The one, so Abu Nasa'i, in the other narration of Nasa'i, he has two narrations of this hadith. The one that we just mentioned, which is in line with the one before. Then he mentioned man raha minkum, the one from amongst you see something of evil, فَغَيَّرْهُ بِيَدِي, then change it with your hand. فَقَدْ بَرِيَ, then he has free himself. He has done what is upon him. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَيَغَيَّرْهُ بِيَدِهِ فَغَيَّرْهُ بِلِسَانِهِ فَقَدْ بَرِيَ, and if he is unable to change with his hand, then change it with his heart, and he is done what is upon him. He has free himself of that matter. فمن لم يستطع أن يغيره بلسانه فغيره بقلبه فقد برئ, and the one who is unable to do it with his tongue, then he does so in his heart. Then he mentioned فقد برئ, then that person free himself, meaning that he have done what is upon him, done what is according to the ability. وذلك أضعف الإيمان, and this is the weakest of Iman. Now that's the difference in the wording. So that hadith somewhat, it mentioned a person who, that each in the case of the person do according to his ability, then he has free himself from any blame. He has free himself from any blame. So see a general concern, the hadith, that this hadith, that you have a slight difference in the wording from those books that we have read. So a slight difference in the narration from what we have read. In the Bukhari, also, the hadith is mentioned so also Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala have mentioned this hadith. I lost the page. No, in Sahih. But Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala of the Asl of Hadith regarding concerning this Hadith also in the Al-Bukhari. But yeah, I've lost my page in Bukhari. But the Hadith that I mentioned, that as we mentioned, so that's the Hadith. So that's the Hadith. The Hadith in the Bukhari means that Marwan, he was the Amir over Medina. So Marwan is the Amir over Medina. Nam. So check in Bukhari so Marwan, he was the Amir over Medina. So this Hadith, it has somewhat a story that attached to it, where something occurred regarding during the time of Eid Salat. They mentioned so Eid Salat, Eid al-Fitr or Eid al-Adha, were concerned that Marwan, who was then the leader of Medina, or the governor of Medina, that he was the governor of Medina. Uh, 956. There you are. So so the hadith Bukhari mentioned regarding concerning this hadith. So it doesn't have the part regarding concerning this part of the hadith, but it have the story behind the hadith. So in Bukhari, it doesn't have concern that that what is mentioned regarding man yara minkum, that regard the one who has seen a evil, he should change it. But it have the story behind this. So it mentioned regarding concerning the hadith that of the hadith mentioned, يعني the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri كان رسول الله الإسلام يخرج يوم الفطر وأضحى إلى مصلى وأول شيء يبدأ به الصلاة ثم ينصرف فيقوم يقابل الناس والناس جلوسا على صفوفهم يعظهم ويوصيهم ويأمرهم. Then he mentions in the hadith ولم يزل. Then he mentioned the hadith in the hadith they mentioned that ولم يزل الناس على ذلك حتى خرجت أو خرجت مع Marwan. That he mentioned that the people that they were upon concerned that the khutbah was done, the salat was done first, and the khutbah. Then he mentioned that I kharajtu mal Marwan, that I came out with Marwan regarding as-salat al-Eid. Wa huwa Amir al-Medina, that Marwan is the Amir, the governor of Medina. So he's the one who's the governor of Medina. Fi adha aw fitr, that either in salat al-fitr or salat al-adha. فلما أتينا المصلى فإذا منبر بناه كثير ibn Salt, that there was a member now that was out there that was built by, he mentioned, Kathir ibn Salt. فإذا مروان يريد أن يرتقيه قبل أن يصلي, that Marwan, that he wanted to go upon the member before he prayed. فجبثت بثوبي جبثت بثوبي, then I can somewhat like pull him by his thawb. فجبثني, then he can somewhat pull me. وارتفع فخطب قبل الصلاة. They mentioned that he went up and he gave the khutbah before the salat. فقلت له, then I said to him, غيرتم والله, that you have changed this matter, or you have changed this matter by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فقال أبو سعيد فقد ذهب ما تعلم الحديث. So the hadith can somehow show that in regard to this case, that Abu Sa'id, that it was Salatul Adha or Salatul Eid that have occurred, where also he mentioned that Marwan, he was the leader of Medina, the governor of Medina. So a person of status, a person of authority. And then, as I mentioned, the other narration, it mentions as to what was said by Abu Sa'id when he saw this incident occur. Of the ulama who's mentioned that is two separate stories. That two separate stories occur, but we'll discuss that. But overall, the hadith it shows regarding that there's a story, the narrations, that there's a story that goes along with this hadith. And then Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, that he mentioned this particular hadith as a proof regarding what was being done by Marwan was incorrect. And that what a person have done, that is justified in making inkar of that munkar. They mentioned there's also other narration of this hadith, but that have like a meaning of this hadith of Ibn Mas'ud and others who have hadith of that meaning regarding inkar of munkar, which we'll discuss that there are many hadith of that nature. So overall regarding that hadith, that the hadith is sahih, but also that there's several wording of the hadith. This is just one of the wording of the hadith. As for what is mentioned next, so the next thing also that the hadith also there's a story behind the hadith, so to put certain things in context. To put certain things in context. The next of those things that are mentioned, that hamiyat al-hadith, that discussing the hamiyat, the importance of this hadith, and what have been said by the ulama regarding the importance of this particular hadith. That Qadi Iyad, so Qadi Iyad, one of the ulama al-Malikiyya, that also have an explanation of the book of Sahih Muslim. So Qadi Iyad, of those who have explained Sahih Muslim, so his explanation that Nawawi came, so An-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala have an explanation also. So Qadi Iyad and others that explain Sahih Muslim, then An-Nawawi came and kind of somewhat mention what is mentioned by Qadi Iyad an additional. With me? So Nawawi explanation is a part of the work of Qadi Iyad with his An-Nawawi additions. He mentioned Qadi Iyad hadith aslun fi sifat taghyir al-munkar. That is hadith is like, it's the asl, is of the a foundation in how to go about changing of evil. How to go about changing of evil. Then he mentioned some other things that to be discussed regarding sifat of the person that wish to make of inkar of munkar, that to be discussed. Also An-Nawawi, when he mentioned this hadith or commented on this hadith, he mentioned هذا باب عظيم به, that this is something that this hadith, it considered to be something of importance. Qiwam al-amr, that matter regarding, that establishing regarding encouraging of good. Wa halaki, and also regarding concerning people being, things being destroyed. إذا كثرت الخبث, if evil have become predominant, if evil have become widespread. إذا كثرت الخبث وأمت إقاب الصالح الطالح, and also if evil become widespread, they might find that the righteous may be punished with the good. The people are the evil one, the righteous would be punished with the evil ones. Nam, so that's you mentioned regarding that particular hadith, where if evil is left and not challenged, then those who are said to be the people of evil, they would be punished along with them, those who are righteous, those that are righteous. So that's concerning of what is mentioned regarding the importance of this particular hadith. And of those who mentioned هذا حديث عظيم شأن, that of those who mentioned this hadith is something of great importance. لأنه نص على وجوب إنكار المنكر. As this hadith, it serves as it shows that it is compulsory, it's compulsory إنكار المنكر, for one to rebuke things of evil and to challenge of evil. So this hadith, it becomes of those hadith that are used as a proof that it's compulsory that one should make inkar upon evil, to refute the things of evil and to challenge things of evil. So the narration that we mentioned, so from the hadith we said that there's the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, from the various narration that we have mentioned, that the story that goes along with it, that it shows that either two things, that Abu Sa'id, that the narration in Sahih Bukhari, it mentioned that Abu Sa'id al-Khudri is the one who challenged Marwan. With me? So read the narration in Sahih Bukhari that it seems as if Marwan was the one who challenged, that's Abu Sa'id al-Khudri was the one who challenged Marwan. And we said Marwan was then the leader, the Amir of Medina. Now, so Abu Sa'id directly challenged him on this matter and pointed what he's doing is incorrect. Then in the other narration that we have mentioned, that it seems that there was someone they mentioned, فَقَامَ رَجُلٌ قام رجل, that a person stand, and that was being narrated by Abu Sa'id. Mentioned that فَقَدْ then mentioned regarding that person that the person have done what is upon him. So he was talking about someone else. The person have fulfilled what is upon him when he said to Marwan, خَلَفْتَ السُنَّةِ. So that was being said by someone else. And then Abu Sa'id seemed as if he agreed. A person mentioned فَقَدْ أَدَيْتْ مَا عَلَيْهِ that the person have done what is upon him. So it seemed as if Marwan was observing what was taking place regarding a man when he saw what Marwan was doing, and the person challenged Marwan in his action. Then Abu Sa'id al-Khudri mentioned from what he was saying, what you have done, you have fulfilled what you have done. What is that you have done what is upon you. Then he mentioned the hadith to prove regarding that what a person did of making inkar, rebuking what was done by Marwan, that he's correct in this. So he mentioned this hadith. Taib. So something that may be discussed, that in this hadith, so that the main shahid of the hadith in the so as for identifying who is this person that so you have some aqwal between the ulama regarding who is this person who stood up and corrected Marwan. That of the ulama have mentioned that in the books of Mubhamat, that people were mentioned, a person mentioned that persons Ammara ibn Ru'ayba, so a person called Ammara ibn Ru'ayba, that's the person that stood up and that approached Marwan. And others mentioned that the person that actually approached Marwan, some mention it is Ibn Mas'ud. Of those who mentioned that Fath al-Bari, Ibn Hajar mentioned يحتمل أن يكون who the person who approached Marwan, that unknown person, Aba Mas'ud كما في رواية عبد الرزاق, as in the narration of Abdul Razak in his Musannaf. So you have that discussion regarding who's the person, but someone approached Marwan. But I mentioned that in some narration that either some mentioned that Abu Sa'id Khudri, also that it seems that he approached Marwan. With me? As a narration in Sahih Bukhari. So as for that person who approached Marwan, some mentioned that Abu Sa'id Khudri and also that other person. The other person went first, then also Abu Sa'id also approached Marwan regarding what had happened. But overall, that Marwan was somewhat challenged regarding what he did. And the person make inkar, rebuke Marwan for what he had done, which is matters regarding changing the format of Salatul Eid, of making the khutbah first and then the salat after. Ibn Hajar had mentioned regarding the reason of this, that they mentioned that Ibn Hajar, when he discussed that the reason why he did this, and sometimes other people might try to justify the things that they're doing. That you have mentioned regarding of the time during Marwan, and Marwan was of the Khulafa of Banu Umayyah. So Dawla Banu Umayyah is one of the Khulafa, the fourth amongst them. Marwan ibn Hakam, he was the fourth of the leaders amongst them. And that he did so in a time where that he mentioned the people that because it was during that time that after Salatul Eid, that the khutbah was used, in a political way. The khutbah was used in a political way, where those leaders that Ibn Hajar mentioned, that at times that they would condemn strongly, speak against, attack individuals on the minbar in the khutbah. So the people, and also they will overly praise others. So the people can somewhat stop listening to the khutbah after the salat. They'll just leave after the salat and not wait for the khutbah. So for Eid, because the people saw became now the practice of some of the khulafa, that in their khutbah they use it to attack others and to attack others, and also to overly praise others. So the people, what they would do, the people in this, when they pray the salat, as they pray Salat al-Eid, they just go. Then Marwan can observe this practice of the people. So he, switch it, which is to give the khutbah first so they can hear what he has to say. You understand? And do what he needs to be done. And then he gave the khutbah. So they mentioned that, and we'll discuss. So that's the reason they mentioned behind it. So it shows regarding concern at times that even a member can be used in a political way. And that's from then, and still will continue until today. There are times the member is used in a political way. So Marwan, so that's concerning of what is said. As to what is said. So from the general hadith, so Marwan is Marwan ibn Hakam ibn Abi As al-Qurashi, Raba Khulafa Dawla Banu Umayyah fi Damascus. So they can something like Damascus, that they are ones kind of somewhat their state, their capital was in Damascus. So that's concerning that leadership, that they were the ones who were at the state, but also that, so you find that Marwan at time was that head of Medina, and then became the head of the state. Was like the governor of Medina, and then eventually became the one in charge. أيوة.
فقال أبا سعيد قد ذهب ما تعلم فقلت ما أعلم والله خير مما لا أعلم. Like, how does he, when he says that to Abu Sa'id, is it, in what sense?
No. Consider that what they mentioned here regarding concerning that who was the first, they mentioned that who was the first person to change the format of Salatul Eid. So you have a discussion with, as I mentioned, Uthman. Some mention a person who did that, made that change was, some mention Muawiyah and others. So it was actually the first person who changed from doing the Salat first and the Khutbah after. They mentioned, you have a discussion, as they mentioned that, did it go back to Uthman ibn Affan or went back to Muawiyah? That some mention that no, either some mention that it was changed from those before, then stopped, then Marwan restarted it. That he mentioned that that you may not be aware of what others are aware of. Now I may be aware of something you are not aware of. That I'm not the one who actually started this. It began before, maybe stopped, and then I'm just restarting it. But I mentioned it. That's what is mentioned. That is what is claimed. And that's another A. But you understand that I'm aware of something maybe you're not aware of, which is, but even those regarding that mention that regarding concern that that Uthman, then it's a Muslim narration or Da'if, Omar and the like is Da'if regarding they are the ones who changed the format of the Salatul Eid. A, from the hadith are those things to be discussed regarding this particular hadith that matters regarding concerning that hukum, which concerns that the hadith can sound the mawdu of the hadith regarding al-amr inkar al-munkar. So you usually find that al-amr bil ma'ruf, encouraging of good, wa nahy al-munkar, and forbidding of evil, that usually go together. But this hadith can sound mention regarding that if there's munkar that is being done, then how to go about changing that munkar, how to intervene. So it mentioned that the stages of inkar al-munkar, that what's the process and the way to go about inkar al-munkar, and we'll discuss those ones in the coming lesson. So it discussed concerns, now it give us like a system regarding how to change of munkar, how to approach changing of munkar. And also from this we'll discuss concerning hukum inkar al-munkar, what's the ruling in denouncing an evil, and different halat. It have different levels as we'll discuss. And also of those things regarding that inkar al-munkar, that it can occur between in the mujtama, within the society. Then you might have, which become now the case regarding if munkar are occurring by those in authority. With me? So you have the common people, the normal people, us, involved in munkar. What's the method in making inkar upon those munkar, denouncing those evil? But then the case now regarding those in authority. When if they are involved in evil, are we allowed to make inkar against them, denounce what they're doing? So you have those things to be a part of discussion. And so said it so, some of those things to be a part of that discussion. And also asbab intishar al-munkar, that what are the reasons or causes of the spread of munkar. Nam. And also to mention khutura or khatar, that the evil of not making inkar against munkar. Then so what are the evil consequences when we stop encouraging good and forbidding of evil? What come of this? What's the consequence? What's the consequence? So those are the things to be discussed regarding this particular hadith. So it's that of the hadith, that's various points that will come that the person was doing that when this hadith was mentioned in this case. In most of that, the one who was doing the munkar was and Marwan was a person of authority. So Marwan saw this hadith was mentioned by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, where a person saw, and that said if it's Yawm al-Eid, it will be in what? In public. Yawm al-Eid, it will be in public. So Abu Sa'id al-Khudri was there observing what was going on and also approached Marwan. But other who was present, stood up and make that inkar against Marwan, who was the leader. So we said that, so the matter regards, but he mentioned the hadith which is general, but does that ruling also, does that applies also to those who are in authority? Clear of the train of thought regarding inkar of munkar? Is anyone exempt? And of those concerns of the discussion will be that amongst ourselves, and that is known and established. But those in authority, how we go about making inkar against them. What's the way to go about doing it? The proper way. Regarding those in authority, how you make inkar against them. How you make inkar against those in authority. Is there a method? Can you do so? Said in this case, it occurred publicly. And it said that man tried to pull him and all that, so something was done in public. But are we allowed to make inkar to those in authority in a public platform, in front of everyone? Or it has to be done in private? With me? So that's all those things to be discussed, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So inshallah ta'ala we'll end today and continue next week. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه السبيل والآخرة الحمد لله. I now,